Hey guys, welcome back to Cocky Gachas, and in this video I want to touch on whether Velanna is truly worth your Everstones. Let's dive right in. So first things first, on the screen you can see this is Velanna's skill page. We're going to run through her skills. Her first skill, sub-skill, is Soaring Hatred. Summons a sword that pierces the ground, most notably the damage percentage and the bleed percentage. You can read it for yourself, right? What I want to highlight is that it's only a 2.5 meters radius, so it's very small. Most likely are going to only hit one target. This inflicts bleed, and bleed is a very important aspect of Velanna itself. She relies a lot on bleed, so this is one of her skills which applies bleed, but it's rather limited because it's a very small radius. Next, we are going to touch on Swirling Frenzy. Summons a sword which deals damage. This one does not inflict any bleed. What it does is that it deals additional damage to bleeding targets, as well as giving her physical and magical resistance for 14 seconds. So this is quite significant when it comes to her tanking kit itself, right? So I think this skill is one of the best skills for her kit, whereby it really provides her with a lot of tanking potential. Right, and we're going to move on with a passive, Seeding Obsession. This means that Velanna's sword seeks enemy bloods, and then all of her attacks will deal crit damage and also have lifesteal, right? So this one is, I would say it's both DPS and as well as tanking, right? Lifesteal is very good for sustain, and crit hits, of course, it's very good to for inflicting DPS. So this passive itself does two jobs at once. Next, we are going to touch on her main skill, Wild Dance. Slashes at nearest enemy and then moves forward in a range of 5 meter length at a 180-degree angle, and then this deals damage and additional damage to bleeding targets at level 181. Also stuns the target for 2 seconds if the target is bleeding. So this skill once again relies on you having attacking on a bleeding target for max potential. Otherwise it's quite meh, in my opinion, only doing 220% damage and no other forms of utility, right? So yeah, this is quite bad, I think, if you don't hit it on a bleeding target. Next, we have the ultimate, which is the Ball of Blood and Snake. Goes into a frenzy, deals damage equals to 240% to all enemies and opens their wounds, which cannot be cured. So what this means is that once you inflict the bleed on them with this ultimate, they cannot cleanse it off for 12 seconds. So this is very useful to enable the rest of her kit, but as we all know, right, ultimate doesn't come up at the start of the game, so she would have to rely on the Soaring Hatred to apply bleed before she can do any of this nonsense, right? So also deals additional damage to bleeding targets. So once again at level 201 adds an effect which stuns bleeding targets for 3 seconds. So this one does actually a lot of damage if you are hitting someone that is already bleeding, right? So if you're hitting someone that's not bleeding, it's quite meh, because we cannot simply look at her attack percentage, right? First things we need to take note is that Velanna is a tank unit, or rather a strength unit, right? She is not DPS centric, and we can even see from her kit itself later. I'll show you guys the stats. It's not DPS centric, so the high attack multiplier that is conditional is quite meh, and dealing DOT is much worse compared to dealing burst damage, in my opinion, especially challenging enemies that are of higher CP, higher level. So we take a look at her attack here. She only has like 56k attack. Normally a DPS unit would have roughly 65k attack when it goes to like max, right? Like Origin 5-star. So for reference, we can take a look at other units here. Even for Talia itself, I think she has 60k if I'm not wrong. So Talia as a support, she also has 60k, right? So yeah, this is just a comparison. So Velanna's position is more of a tank unit while trying to do DPS. And of course, we also have to take a look at her artifact skill, right? Because this is very important. Most often times, artifact would either make or break a hero soul. So here we have crit damage increases by 12%. So this is a DPS centric artifact itself, which I think is reasonable, and at max 60% crit damage is nothing to be scoffed at. But like I mentioned, her kit is more tanky, right? So yeah, I'm not sure how well this would translate even if you get it to Origin. So now that we are done reviewing her skills, I would like to point out also the best teammates that you want to pair with Velanna, because oftentimes whether you want to like draw a hero for efficiency, right, for value itself, you need to see whether you are able to utilize it to this maximum potential. And for Velanna, I think teammates are extremely important. You do need to have teammates that can inflict bleed, and I think Ayame really is the best teammate for Velanna Velanna here because her main skill and her sub skills both inflict bleed, and so you have two separate sources of bleed infliction, as well as the main skill. I think this is the main point, right? Having a 4.6 meters wide and 7 meters long area to inflict bleed, most times it's going to hit multiple targets, and that would really help Velanna shine. And I also like to talk a bit about other units where bleed comes into play, right? Whereby there is a Haru over here, so I don't really have Haru, right? You can see this spinning dagger does bleed, as well as the Jacqueline. Wait, where's the Jacqueline? So Jacqueline here, Jacqueline's main skill over here inflicts bleed to opponents in a AoE, right? So oftentimes this can hit multiple targets as well, depending on whether or rather depending on the enemy's formation, right? So if they are like backline centric, you might be able to hit multiple targets. Other times no, but her sub skill also inflict bleeds if I'm not wrong, so it should be this one, correct? Strategy Crescent Moon also inflict bleeds. So two instances, and I feel like the problem with this Jacqueline as well as Haru itself is that they are not that reliable. Jacqueline oftentimes just go into the backline and dies, right? So maybe the sustain part is a problem for these two targets. Haru itself have a very small AoE when it comes to bleed, so I don't think those are that good. So I would mainly focus on is if you have Ayame. If you really have Ayame and maybe Epic Plus, I think that should be good. Even Epic is decent, right? But I'm not sure if she is able to survive at higher like chapters, at chapter 16. I'm not sure Epic Ayame might be able to survive opponent fleets, but that's something to consider. So moving on, I would like to touch on the pros and cons of Velanna. The pros, firstly, are that she is a tank unit that can do DPS, right? Her passive does DPS while at the same time providing lifesteal for sustain. She has a skill that gives her physical and magical resistance, which is very, very valuable. And with the lifesteal, the crit, and also the artifact which has crit damage, right? She is like a tank plus DPS itself. And oftentimes when trying to review a unit, we need to compare her to the other units in her faction. And currently, I would say Undead faction is quite weak. The strongest units are probably Jacqueline plus Petra as well as Prim. So these three units are the stronger ones, and even then I struggle to find how they would be proven to be stronger than Velanna in a sense, because Jacqueline as a DPS, she is very niche, right? She goes to the backline assassin, but the AI itself, when they have multiple units in the back row, they are all going to target the Jacqueline, and then she dies very, very easily. So her DPS is not really that considerable or consistent. And then compared to Petra is a tank that also does DPS. The problem is that Petra cannot really pair with Catherine, right? Because of her passive, she needs to be alone, and Catherine is quite important when it comes to having high deficits of CP, which is where Velanna comes in, right? Velanna can be slotted in with a Catherine because she doesn't really have the drawback of Petra. So comparatively to these other units, you can hence look at Velanna that she is stronger because other units are weaker, right? Not really because she is that strong, I don't think so. But also, another pros for Velanna itself is she has a very, very strong attack multiplier, provided that the enemies are in a bleed condition. And of course, lastly, a lot of people draw Velanna because she has mommy vibes, and I think this is quite valid, guys. Don't say that this is not valid. A lot of people, I know some of you watching this, you're going to draw regardless of what I say because you just like her vibe itself, right? So yeah, that's for you. Moving on to her cons, I think that the problem with Velanna is that she is very reliant on having other teammates that is going to inflict bleed, and those other teammates oftentimes are not the best. So you can say that Haru is a decent unit, but her kit itself only have one bleed infliction, as well as having a very small AoE, so really out of the question. Jacqueline, like I say, she dies very, very easily when she jumps to the back line, so most of the time it's quite sussy. I don't really think that she can survive that long to provide a reliable bleed infliction. Also, usually she goes to the back line to inflict bleed, while Velanna is the one that is trying to hit the front units, right? And the front units having bleed is the main point oftentimes. And also, if you really want to talk about it, the best is Ayame, and Ayame is a demon unit, and with the arena shop being this badly optimized, I don't think people are going to have high ascension Ayame that soon unless you're ultra whale. So yeah, so that's the main problem, main gripe with her, I think. And also another problem is that she is since she's reliant on having bleed on her targets, Talia, Prim, Jiho, these units that are going to be more prevalent in the battlefront, they are going to be able to cleanse away the bleed. And you might say that her ultimate has a bleed that cannot be cleansed, but honestly, the moment you use ultimate, if you are not using it on a bleeding target, you are already losing out. I don't think she's worth using if you don't use her that on her ultimate on units that are already bleeding. I don't think the damage is that good. So from that aspect, it's quite bad. And given the fact that she requires timing, right? She needs them to be bleeding to be able to do max potential, max damage. She is kind of like a manual hero. You kind of want to save your skills to use it at the right time so that you inflict bleed, then you unleash all the other skills of Velanna. So manual heroes are not that good for pushing Battlefront. I know a lot of people don't really have time to go manual every single thing. So that itself, I do consider it as a legit con. And lastly, I would say that she's like situated as a tank and a DPS, but I'll be honest, she doesn't do both of her jobs that well at lower ascensions. She's going to die very easily against higher CP units. She's going to do minuscule damage to these units also if they are at higher CP, given that dot damage, right? Damage over time itself, it's very, very bad against higher CP targets, whereby they are able to recover more than your dot damage. So that is a very big con. So if you are like constantly pushing chapter 16 with like under-leveled units, Velanna might not be that good. Now for Velanna's review as well as future unit reviews that I'm going to do, I also give a rating for specific content, because I understand that sometimes you just want to pull a unit to consider where you can slot her in, right? So if you already have a good team for a specific content, you might not need this unit itself. So for Velanna specifically, let's touch on the Battlefront first. I think she is relatively weak in Battlefront if you are a serious Battlefront pusher. So if you are pushing chapters 15, chapter 16, and now you are starting to get Velanna, even if you get her to origin level 200 on chapters 15 and 16, where if you have like a high deficit of CP, you're going to see Velanna's effectiveness drop significantly. She's not able to tank as well, and she is not going to do the damage that she needs to do, given that damage over time is relatively weak against stronger opponents. They are able to recover much more over time itself. So yeah, it kind of diminishes her damage from that aspect. So I give her a 3 out of 5. Now as for her usefulness in bosses and subsequently potentially guild bosses, I'm going to give her a rating of 3.5 out of 5. I did ran a Velanna for testing, Origin 200 Velanna for testing in Battlefront, as well as for the Chloe boss itself for reference, right? If you guys are interested in knowing how I get this information. So by testing myself, I think that she is quite lackluster. The current Violet team is outperforming her even when you are trying to pair her with like bleed inflicting targets. And honestly, even in the situations whereby you have multiple bleed inflicting targets, right? You usually would save your skill, so you will always have your bleed on the boss itself. So the max effectiveness wouldn't differ that much simply because I don't have Ayame. So I think that this is quite fair to say her bossing potential is decent, but compared to like Violet, roughly the same, right? You don't really need to invest in Velanna. Violet does it much easier at lower ascensions. And also the fact is that unless future guild bosses content requires specific tank itself, I don't think she's that needed in this aspect. And lastly, on PvP, I'll give her a 2.5 out of 5. I think she doesn't do that well in PvP, simply because the strong units that are in PvP, if anyone is even concerned about PvP, is that this strong units don't really pair well with Velanna unless you're using like bees. Subsequently, maybe Honglan would come out and then you would be very like happy to use her together with Honglan. Also because one of her main cons is being CC'd, right? So using them together, it's probably good, but for now, PvP potential not that good, and her damage comes from ultimate. You can't really use ultimate in PvP, so I'll give her a 2.5 out of 5 for this aspect. Now overall, my take is that I see potential in Velanna, but I am hard skipping skipping Velanna this time round. I don't think I have the ability to really use Velanna that well given my team itself. I don't have Ayame, I don't really even have Haru, right? The most I have is like Jacqueline, and my Jacqueline is only at Epic, so even if they give me dupes in the upcoming event, I still can't make Jacqueline that good, given that all the food, if I were to draw Velanna, will go into Velanna. So I tried splashing the level 200 Velanna Origin on my team to push Battlefront. Didn't go well. Don't really have the units to make her work. But if you are specifically going for a undead team itself, you might be able to make her work, right? It's just because my team, I can't really get the racial buffs on without sacrificing key units of my team, so I don't think she's that good. Overall, I think with high deficit CP that I am currently challenging, she's proving a lot more lackluster. It can definitely work though if you are more casual, like you are playing this game on a more casual basis. You are currently, your units are level 150, but you are only on chapters 12, chapters 13. I think Velanna, if you pull her right now, she's going to be a great addition to the team. She can function well when her CP deficit is much closer. And also, if you just enjoy her kit itself, you like her animations, definitely pull for her, right? There's no big deal, but maybe I'm not sure if you want to go all the way out to go to Origin, but the dilemma is that if you don't make her Origin, she's going to work very, very poorly at lower Ascension. So that's the reason why I'm skipping Velanna personally, and I'm just going to save my Everstones for Honglan. And that about does it for my review of Velanna. Do let me know in the comment section below whether you are going to pull for Velanna. Also, what's more important than pulling for Velanna is to manage your resources well, because without resources, you cannot level your Velanna. So definitely check out this video here whereby I touch on every single resource in the game and how to manage them. I'll see you guys over there. This is Corky Gachas, signing off.